The tragic killings of two Minnesota lawmakers in recent weeks have left the state reeling, plunging the political landscape into a storm of grief, outrage, and bitter partisan divide. What should have been a moment of collective mourning and national unity has instead turned into a flashpoint for political commentary, rhetoric, and in some cases, mockery, especially from prominent Republicans, including former President Donald Trump. The incident unfolded when two Democratic members of the Minnesota legislature, Representative Laura Wintour and Senator Marcus Halliday, were found dead in what authorities have now confirmed as separate targeted attacks. While details remain under investigation, early reports indicate both officials had previously voiced concerns over threats to their safety in the months leading up to their deaths. Their loss has stunned Minnesota's capital and ignited heated debates around political violence, domestic extremism, and the increasingly toxic state of American discourse. In the immediate aftermath, Democratic leaders issued emotional tributes and called for calm, compassion, and justice. Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, a Democrat, described the killings as an unimaginable tragedy and a direct attack on democracy. At a candlelight vigil in St. Paul, mourners stood shoulder to shoulder in freezing temperatures, holding signs that read "Public service shouldn't be a death sentence and we will not be silenced." However, as Democrats grieved and appealed for unity, several Republican figures, both in Minnesota and on the national stage, took a markedly different approach. Within hours of the killings becoming public, former President Donald Trump posted on Truth Social, not to offer condolences or condemn violence, but to suggest, without evidence, that the Democrats were using the deaths for political gain. In his post, Trump wrote, "Terrible news out of Minnesota. But don't let the radical left use this to distract from the disaster they've created. Crime, chaos, and corruption, all on their watch." The message, while not directly mocking the victims, was perceived by many as insensitive and opportunistic, especially given the timing. It didn't stop there. In subsequent campaign rallies in Iowa and Georgia, Trump invoked the Minnesota killings again, this time questioning the credibility of Democratic calls for civility. "They say, oh, we need to tone down the rhetoric," Trump said to a cheering crowd. Well, maybe they should start by looking in the mirror. It's their policies that are creating all this instability. These comments drew fierce backlash from Democratic lawmakers and political analysts alike, who condemned the former president for politicizing the tragedy. Some pointed out the danger in downplaying the seriousness of the killings, particularly in a climate where threats against public officials have been on the rise. Trump was not alone. Republican Congressman Matt Gaetz of Florida also weighed in, tweeting, "Democrats are crying crocodile tears in Minnesota. Maybe if they focused more on law and order and less on woke nonsense, this wouldn't be happening." Fox News hosts and conservative pundits quickly picked up on these themes. On the Ingram angle, Laura Ingraham questioned whether Democrats were using the deaths to silence conservative voices, while Tucker Carlson, now hosting a show on his independent platform, implied that the left is turning every tragic incident into a political weapon to demonize the right. This coordinated response from conservative figures has enraged many within the Democratic Party and even some centrists, who argue that mocking, minimizing, or politicizing the death of elected officials crosses a dangerous line. Several Democratic strategists warned that this rhetoric not only deepens political polarization but also risks normalizing violence as a feature of American politics rather than an aberration. Senator Amy Klobuchar, a Democrat from Minnesota, spoke emotionally on the Senate floor. "We cannot allow the deaths of our colleagues to become fodder for political gamesmanship. If we can't even grieve without being mocked or questioned, what does that say about the state of our union?" Others took aim at the broader Republican apparatus. Representative Ilhan Omar, also of Minnesota, blasted what she called a callous and disgraceful response from national GOP figures, saying, "When elected officials are murdered, the appropriate response is not trolling or Twitter jabs, it's leadership, humanity, and accountability." Despite the backlash, Republicans have largely doubled down, insisting that Democrats are weaponizing sympathy and tragedy for electoral advantage. Conservative blogger Ben Shapiro tweeted, "The left wants to blame Republicans for everything." Meanwhile, they run the cities where this violence is happening. Maybe take some responsibility for once. Some GOP voices, however, have tried to steer the conversation toward shared concerns about rising violence against public officials. Senator Mitt Romney, a Republican from Utah, was one of the few conservatives to issue a statement that offered genuine condolences while calling for bipartisan efforts to improve safety for lawmakers. In a press release, Romney wrote, "The killings of any elected officials, regardless of party, is a stain on our democracy. We must come together, not as Republicans or Democrats, but as Americans, to ensure this does not become a recurring tragedy." That statement, though appreciated by some Democrats, was overshadowed by the more prominent voices in the GOP who seemed more focused on spinning the event for political advantage than honoring the lives lost. Public reaction to the political fallout has been mixed. Some voters, particularly independents and moderates, have expressed dismay at the tone of the national discourse. On social media, hashtags like #RespectTheDead and #StopTheMockery began trending as people called for more civility in response to political violence. Meanwhile, grassroots movements have begun organizing vigils, town halls, and safety forums in the wake of the lawmakers' deaths. Local leaders are also exploring legislative proposals to enhance security for state officials, including funding for home protection, increased police presence at public events, and harsher penalties for those who threaten or harm elected officials. In the halls of the Minnesota State Capitol, security has visibly increased. Lawmakers from both parties have quietly expressed unease, acknowledging that the tone of politics in America has reached a boiling point. "You can't help but wonder if you're next," one unnamed Republican legislator said during an interview. "This isn't about party anymore. It's about survival." Still, the national conversation seems more focused on assigning blame than finding solutions. Pundits continue to debate whether rhetoric from the right has gone too far, while others argue that Democrats are equally guilty of incendiary language when the shoe is on the other foot. President Joe Biden, in a rare primetime address, weighed in on the killings, calling them a deeply personal tragedy for our nation and urging Americans to reject political violence in all forms. "We may disagree on many things," Biden said, "but no one should ever fear for their life because they chose to serve the people." Despite Biden's call for unity, the political climate remains tense. With the 2024 election cycle heating up, the killings in Minnesota and the reaction to them may become part of a larger narrative about democracy, decency, and the very nature of leadership in America. The central question now is this: can the country grieve without falling further into division? Can political leaders find it within themselves to honor tragedy with dignity, instead of seizing it as an opportunity for political gain? For now, the answers remain elusive. The families of Laura Wintour and Marcus Halliday continue to mourn. Minnesota residents light candles and leave flowers on the steps of the Capitol. And the rest of the nation watches, waiting to see whether this moment will bring Americans together or drive them even further apart. As tributes pour in from across the world and flags fly at half-staff, one thing is clear: the lives of these two public servants mattered. How their deaths are remembered, and how politicians choose to respond, will speak volumes about the soul of American democracy. The mocking tones from some quarters may fade with time, but the pain of loss will linger in Minnesota, and perhaps in the national conscience. And with every speech, every tweet, every soundbite, we are reminded of the fragile line between passionate disagreement and the kind of hatred that leads to irreversible tragedy. Whether that line will be respected going forward remains to be seen. But in this moment, amid the noise and fury, a choice presents itself, between empathy and mockery, between truth and spin, between healing and harm. Let's hope the right choice is made.